Children observed and learned, absorbing not only the remedies but the gentle, attentive approach to care that would guide them throughout life. Travel to distant towns for medical help was undertaken slowly and carefully. Roads and rivers were navigated with attention, travelers observing conditions and moving deliberately to avoid injury or fatigue. Journeys were quiet and cautious, reflecting both respect for the fragility of life and the importance of preserving calm rhythm in the midst of challenges. Even the structure of homes and towns supported health. Ventilation, sunlight, and access to water were carefully considered. Homes were built with attention to hygiene, airflow, and comfort, while streets and communal spaces allowed easy movement and reduced risk of accidents. Settlers understood that the physical environment itself contributed to the town's collective well-being, and every decision reflected a quiet awareness of this connection. Seasonal changes guided health practices. Spring encouraged outdoor activity and planting, summer provided warmth and abundant food, autumn demanded careful preservation of harvest and preparation for winter, and winter encouraged indoor reflection, rest, and community support. Settlers adjusted work, diet, and care to follow these rhythms, maintaining health and calm and harmony with the changing year. By evening, the town often fell into a soft hush. Fires glowed warmly in homes, smoke drifting gently into the air. Children rested quietly, adults moved calmly through final tasks, and the soft murmur of animals filled barns and pens. Settlers might prepare herbal teas, wrap bandaged limbs, or offer comforting words. Health, like other aspects of town life, was approached slowly, attentively, and with deliberate care. Through these quiet practices of medicine, hygiene, nutrition, and rest, early American towns nurtured not only survival, but well-being, resilience, and continuity. Settlers learned to live in harmony with their bodies, their families, and the environment. Every soft action, every careful observation, and every gentle step reinforced the calm, steady rhythm that defined town life. And so, in the care of life, through herbs and remedies, quiet observation, deliberate meals, and gentle attention to the rhythms of body and mind, early towns cultivated both health and calm. Settlers moved through their days with patience, thoughtfulness, and mindfulness, ensuring that life, though filled with labor and responsibility, remained steady, predictable, and serene. The heartbeat of the town, nurtured by care and observation, continued quietly, offering reassurance and gentle comfort to all who lived within it. Even in the quiet rhythm of early American towns, life was not always gentle or predictable. Storms could sweep across fields, fires could creep along rooftops, and sudden illness could strike a family. Yet, through careful observation, deliberate planning, and patient cooperation, settlers learned to respond with calm, thoughtful resilience. The town, though small and simple, became a place of safety and steady reassurance, where challenges were met with steady hands and quiet minds. Imagine a soft afternoon suddenly darkening with clouds, the sky turning a muted gray as wind begins to stir. Settlers pause in their work, glancing at the horizon, noting the direction of clouds and the strength of the breeze. Decisions are made slowly and deliberately, livestock are guided to shelter, tools are secured, and fires are banked or extinguished. Even in the face of nature's unpredictability, there is no panic, only calm attention and careful action. Fires, though dangerous, were met with steady, organized efforts. Homes and barns were constructed with practical measures, clay chimneys, stone foundations, and wooden shingles carefully maintained. When sparks threatened, neighbors acted together, forming quiet lines to pass buckets of water, damp cloths, or sand. Each movement was deliberate, measured, and purposeful. Children watched from safe distances, learning the rhythm of calm response. While adults coordinated gently, reinforcing the quiet pulse of community cooperation, storms brought rain, wind, and occasionally flooding. Settlers prepared slowly, building drainage ditches, reinforcing riverbanks, and constructing homes with elevated foundations. When floods occurred, movement was careful and intentional. Families guided animals to higher ground, salvaged possessions gradually, and supported one another through soft words and shared effort. Even the natural force of water was met not with haste or panic, but with steady, coordinated attention, reflecting the deep patience of life in these towns. Illness could strike unexpectedly, and here too, calm observation and slow care were essential. Communities relied on the quiet wisdom of healers, midwives, and elders, who guided treatment with herbs, careful monitoring, and patience. Neighbors assisted one another gently, providing food, water, warmth, and reassurance. Even in moments of fear or uncertainty, the rhythm of deliberate care prevailed, soothing both body and mind, reinforcing the town's soft resilience. Disasters, though rare, offered opportunities for the community to strengthen bonds. When a barn collapsed, a home caught fire, or a sudden illness swept through a household, settlers came together with calm purpose. Work was divided patiently. Some tended to animals, some repaired structures, some brought supplies or cooked meals. The town's response was deliberate, reinforcing the shared understanding that life, though fragile, could be preserved through cooperation, patience, and attention. Even minor emergencies followed the town's gentle patterns of response. A broken wheel on a wagon, a tree fallen across a path, or a sudden storm required calm assessment, slow repair, and careful coordination. Settlers worked together quietly, observing, adjusting, and problem-solving without haste. Children learned from these moments, witnessing how challenges could be met with steady hands, soft words, and thoughtful planning. These small lessons contributed to the town's long-term stability and quiet confidence. Safety planning became part of daily life. Settlers agreed on fire watches, safe meeting places, and designated roles in emergencies. Paths and roads were kept clear, water sources accessible, and storage spaces organized. Each measure, while simple, reflected deliberate foresight and careful attention to the unpredictable nature of life. Even small routines, checking a roof, clearing a path, or banking a fire, became part of the town's calm preparation for unexpected events. Seasonal disasters shaped habits as well. Spring storms prompted careful attention to drainage and riverbanks, summer heat encouraged shaded paths and water management, autumn harvest required timely storage to avoid spoilage or loss, and winter's cold demanded thoughtful fire management and preparation for snow-blocked roads. Settlers moved in concert with the seasons, aligning their labor and care with nature's patterns, ensuring that the town's rhythm remained steady and predictable even in the face of challenge. Emergencies were not merely physical, social and communal issues also required careful attention. Disputes, misunderstandings, or conflicts were addressed with the same deliberate patience as storms or illness. Town meetings, quiet conversations, and mediation by respected elders helped resolve tensions without rash action. Settlers learned to listen, compromise, and act deliberately, reinforcing the soft, steady heartbeat of the town and ensuring harmony within the community. Even preparation for potential danger was conducted in a calm, deliberate manner. Firewood was stacked safely, homes reinforced slowly, and food preserved methodically. Settlers did not rush, every action was measured, ensuring that resources were available when needed, without disturbing the gentle rhythm of daily life. Children observed, learning that foresight and patience were as vital to resilience as strength or courage. Travel and communication were adapted in response to emergencies. Roads and paths were cleared carefully after storms, rivers navigated slowly when currents were strong, and messages were delivered deliberately to ensure clarity and reliability. The town's network of roads, waterways, and neighbors became a lifeline in times of challenge. Offering steady, reassuring support when unpredictability arose, even the recovery from disaster was approached gently. Repairs were made slowly, lessons were shared quietly, and routines were re-established with care. Settlers understood that haste could compromise both safety and calm, so every step was measured, ensuring the town returned to normal rhythm with as little stress as possible. This deliberate recovery reinforced the resilience of both individuals and the community as a whole. Children, in particular, absorbed these lessons. They learned not only the practical steps of responding to emergencies but also the emotional rhythm of calm, patient resilience. Observing neighbors, adults, and elders, children internalized the understanding that life, though occasionally unpredictable, could be met with care, attention, and cooperation. They saw firsthand that steady, deliberate action brought security, reassurance, and continuity. Even the natural environment offered subtle guidance in emergencies. Settlers observed clouds, river currents, animal behavior, and wind patterns to anticipate challenges. These observations were shared quietly within the community, helping everyone respond thoughtfully and deliberately. Nature became both teacher and partner, shaping the town's gentle response to unforeseen events. By evening, after a day of careful response to storms, illness, or minor disasters, the town settled back into its soft rhythm. Fires glowed warmly in hearths, paths were cleared, animals were tended, and neighbors shared quiet words of reassurance. Even in the aftermath of challenge, the town exuded a calm pulse, a soft hum of life restored. Settlers drifted to bed with confidence, knowing that their careful preparation, cooperation, and patient attention would continue to safeguard them through both ordinary days and extraordinary events. Through these gentle practices, deliberate preparation, calm response, patient cooperation, and careful observation, early American towns cultivated resilience without panic. Life was never rushed. Fear was never amplified, and even in the face of potential disaster, settlers moved slowly, thoughtfully, and attentively. The community, its routines, and its careful habits became the quiet scaffolding that supported life, offering both security and reassurance. And so, in facing storms, fires, illness, or unexpected challenges, early towns relied on their most essential quality, the patient, deliberate, and gentle rhythm of life. Settlers learned that calm observation, shared responsibility, and careful action were more powerful than haste or fear. Through this quiet resilience, towns not only survived but thrived, reinforcing the slow, steady pulse that guided every path, hearth, and heart. Life, though occasionally uncertain, remained predictable, secure, and soothing, anchored in the thoughtful care of each member of the community. As early American towns settled into their daily rhythm of work, care, education, and leisure, the next natural chapter in their story was growth. Growth was not sudden or hasty. It was gradual, gentle, and deliberate, a soft unfolding that allowed each community to expand while maintaining the calm, steady rhythm that had guided it from the beginning. Roads lengthened, homes multiplied, fields extended, and workshops appeared, but the pace was always measured, ensuring that the town grew in harmony with the land and the people who lived there. Imagine a quiet morning, sunlight spreading slowly across rooftops, gardens, and fields. Settlers step out into the crisp air, noticing small changes in the town's landscape. A new path cleared along a creek. A fresh plank laid across a bridge, or the framework of a house rising gently above the earth. Each addition reflects careful planning and cooperation. Expansion is not chaotic, it is considered and intentional, reinforcing the town's sense of calm and continuity. Roads were often the first sign of growth. New paths were cleared slowly, following the natural contours of the land, avoiding obstacles, and connecting homes, fields, and workshops. These roads were never hurriedly constructed, each turn and incline was measured and discussed. Neighbors worked together to remove stones, fell trees, and level earth, moving deliberately to ensure that every path was safe, accessible, and in harmony with the town's existing layout. Even the soft sound of shovels and axes became part of the gentle rhythm of expansion. New homes and workshops appeared gradually. Families built carefully, often using timber from nearby forests, stone from local quarries, or bricks fired in small kilns. Construction was steady and methodical, posts set firmly in the ground, beams joined carefully, and walls raised with patience. Settlers worked side by side, sharing tools, advice, and soft words of encouragement. Each new structure blended into the town naturally, reflecting the same deliberate style and gentle rhythm as the first homes, fields, and gardens expanded alongside the town. Settlers slowly cleared plots, tilled soil, and planted seeds in neat, thoughtful rows. Crops were rotated and cared for with attention, ensuring not just productivity but a quiet connection to the land. Livestock grazing areas were extended gradually, and water sources were managed to support new animals. Growth of the town never disrupted the delicate balance with nature, it moved in harmony with it, respecting the seasons, the soil, and the gentle flow of rivers. Workshops and small businesses multiplied as well. Blacksmiths, carpenters, weavers, coopers, and bakers set up their spaces with careful attention to layout and workflow. Each new workshop became part of the town's quiet network, supporting both practical needs and the soft pulse of community life. Goods produced here, tools, furniture, clothing, and food, were slowly distributed through calm trade and gentle exchange, reinforcing the town's steady rhythm while nourishing its growth. Even communal spaces, like meeting houses, wells, and public squares, were expanded thoughtfully. Settlers added benches, repaired structures, or enlarged common fields with careful planning. These spaces remained central to the town's life, reflecting both utility and a sense of order. Expansion was guided by observation, discussion, and shared agreement, ensuring that the town grew without losing its familiar, soothing patterns. Growth also encouraged thoughtful governance. As populations increased, responsibilities were distributed slowly. New roles were introduced, additional constables, overseers, and caretakers to maintain order, safety, and calm routines. Decisions about land use, road placement, and shared resources were discussed with patience, ensuring that expansion did not disrupt the town's steady pulse. Every choice was measured, deliberate, and considerate, maintaining harmony while accommodating new growth. Education expanded alongside the town as well. As more children were born and families settled, schoolhouses grew in size or number. Teachers were careful and attentive, ensuring that every child received guidance in reading, writing, arithmetic, and practical knowledge. Learning continued at a deliberate, gentle pace, with lessons intertwined with observation, daily life, and reflection. The rhythm of education blended seamlessly with the expansion of homes, workshops, and streets. Religion, too, adapted to growth. Meeting houses accommodated larger congregations, and new spaces for worship or quiet reflection were established as the town extended. The soft cadence of sermons, prayers, and hymns continued uninterrupted, providing a comforting, unifying rhythm amid the physical changes of expansion. Faith remained a guiding presence, reinforcing stability and calm even as new families and structures joined the community. Markets naturally expanded as well. More settlers meant a greater flow of goods, and markets became slightly larger, though still deliberate and measured in pace. Stalls were arranged carefully, pathways kept clear, and trade conducted slowly and thoughtfully. The rhythm of exchange continued, calm and organized, supporting both practical needs and the gentle pulse of town life. Even as towns grew busier, the deliberate pace ensured that the soothing, predictable environment remained intact. Seasonal patterns guided expansion. Spring and summer were times for planting, construction, and travel. Autumn brought harvest and preservation. Winter offered reflection, repair, and indoor work. Every new building, road, or field was planned with these natural cycles in mind, ensuring that growth did not disrupt the town's calm rhythm but instead harmonized with it. Settlers observed and adapted, moving slowly in step with the environment, learning to expand without haste. Social connections deepened with growth. New families brought fresh skills, stories, and traditions, enriching the community's quiet culture. Neighbors shared knowledge, assisted one another with construction or farming, and participated together in gentle rituals of worship, leisure, and learning. Even as the town's physical footprint increased, the soft bonds of community remained central, knitting settlers together with quiet trust and shared purpose. Animals continued to play a role in growth. Oxen and horses carried materials, aided in construction, and supported transportation. Livestock multiplied as pastures expanded, while pets and smaller animals contributed to daily life and quiet companionship. Observing, tending, and guiding animals remained a steady, meditative task, reinforcing the calm rhythm that underpinned the town's expansion. Even minor improvements reflected careful thought. Fences were extended slowly, wells deepened with deliberate effort, and drainage systems maintained gradually. Paths were smoothed for easier walking, bridges reinforced, and communal areas tended with care. Each small improvement contributed to the town's overall health, safety, and comfort. Allowing growth to proceed harmoniously with the familiar rhythms of daily life. By evening, after a day of measured expansion, the town often exuded a gentle sense of accomplishment. Fires glowed warmly in new homes, fields reflected the soft light of sunset, and families gathered to rest and reflect. Settlers moved quietly through streets and pathways, observing the subtle changes, appreciating the steady progress, and preparing for another day of thoughtful labor. Even in growth, life remained calm, deliberate, and soothing. Through these slow, careful practices, early American towns grew not with haste or chaos, but with gentle patience, observation, and cooperation. Expansion was guided by the rhythm of daily life, the cycles of nature, and the shared wisdom of the community. Roads, homes, workshops, fields, and public spaces all extended naturally, reinforcing both practicality and calm. Settlers learned that growth, like every other aspect of town life, was best approached deliberately, with attention, care, and quiet mindfulness, and so, the town's gentle heartbeat persisted, even as its footprint widened. Streets, homes, fields, and workshops multiplied, but the deliberate pace, thoughtful attention, and quiet cooperation that had shaped its earliest days continued to guide it. Expansion was not a disruption but a continuation, a slow, harmonious unfolding that preserved the soft rhythm of life while allowing the town to flourish. Each new plank, stone, or seed planted was a thread in the expanding tapestry of the town, woven carefully, patiently, and with calm purpose. As the sun begins its slow descent over the quiet streets of early American towns, it casts a soft, golden glow across rooftops, fields, and pathways. Shadows stretch gently across fences and gardens, and the town itself seems to pause for a moment, resting in the calm that it has worked so patiently to create. In these final moments of our journey through its history, we can reflect quietly on the life, the rhythms, and the enduring legacy of these gentle communities. The story of early American towns is not only about homes, roads, and public buildings. It is about the people who moved deliberately through their days, weaving careful patterns of work, care, learning, and leisure. It is about neighbors helping one another with soft hands and steady hearts, sharing wisdom in calm voices, and meeting challenges with patience and quiet resilience. Every path walked, every seed planted, and every hearth tended contributed to a rhythm of life that was both practical and soothing. Think of the small meeting houses where decisions were made slowly, voices listened to attentively, and compromises reached through calm discussion. These spaces were not merely buildings, they were the heart of the town, a gentle reminder that community depends on patience, trust, and mutual respect. Governance in these early towns was subtle, soft-spoken, and deliberate, ensuring that life flowed with a steady, comforting pace. Education, too, offered quiet guidance. Children learned slowly, tracing letters in sand or ink, observing the seasons, and absorbing the wisdom shared by teachers and elders. Learning was integrated with life itself, the tending of gardens, the care of animals, and the rhythm of daily chores were all opportunities to practice attentiveness, patience, and calm reasoning. In this way, the towns nurtured not just knowledge, but a soft, enduring confidence in each individual and the community as a whole. Faith and quiet reflection played a gentle, stabilizing role. Meeting houses and chapels offered spaces for contemplation, songs, and prayer. Settlers found reassurance in regular rituals and gentle hymns, weaving spirituality into the fabric of everyday life. Religion was not imposed harshly, it was shared gently, providing both guidance and comfort. In its rhythm, families and neighbors found peace, a steadying pulse that complemented the other aspects of town life. Play, music, and storytelling reminded settlers of the lighter side of life. Children discovered small joys in quiet games, handcrafted toys, and gentle exploration of nature. Adults took solace in soft melodies, reflective hobbies, and calm conversation. Together, these moments of leisure created a rhythm that balanced work, care, and responsibility, reinforcing the town's sense of harmony and well-being. Every song hummed, story shared, or object crafted added to the gentle heartbeat of community life. Health and care remained at the center of daily routines. Settlers tended to their bodies, families, and neighbors with deliberate attention. Herbs, careful observation, hygiene, nutrition, and rest formed a quiet system of support. Illness or injury was met with patience and compassion, never haste. Emergencies were addressed with steady hands and calm coordination, strengthening both safety and trust. In these practices, the town cultivated a resilience that was slow, steady, and comforting, a rhythm that reassured every resident. Growth and expansion were equally deliberate. Roads, homes, workshops, and fields multiplied gradually, reflecting careful planning and cooperative effort. The town extended without losing its gentle pulse. New families were welcomed, new skills shared, and new spaces added in harmony with the existing order. Expansion, like every other aspect of life, followed a measured rhythm, respecting nature, neighbors, and the familiar patterns of daily life. Even as towns grew physically, their calm heartbeat remained unchanged. In reflecting on these towns, we can also sense the intangible threads that connected each settler. Patience, cooperation, attentiveness, and respect for the rhythms of life were woven into every street, field, and hearth. Settlers were never rushed. They worked, learned, played, and cared with mindfulness and intention. Every small task, building a fence, preparing a meal, planting a garden, was part of a larger pattern of gentle attention, creating a life that was predictable, nurturing, and soothing. Perhaps the quietest legacy of early American towns is this rhythm itself. It continues to echo softly in the streets we walk today, the stories we tell, and the traditions that remain. The careful observation of nature, the gentle cooperation of neighbors, the deliberate pace of work and learning, all these principles shaped towns that were both practical and comforting. They remind us, even now, that life moves best when it is approached with patience, thoughtfulness, and a gentle awareness of others. As night falls over these towns, imagine the soft glow of fires and hearths, the flicker of lanterns through windows, and the faint murmur of families winding down their days. Streets, fields, and workshops are quiet, resting until dawn. Children are asleep, dreaming of gardens, animals, and simple adventures. Adults settle into chairs, reflecting on the day, their hands tired but steady, their minds at peace. Even the gentle hum of animals contributes to the town's serene lullaby. Through all the chapters of this story, from the first homes and roads, to governance, education, faith, play, health, emergencies, and expansion, we see a life guided by deliberate care. Early American towns were not built quickly, nor were they governed harshly. They grew slowly, deliberately, and with attention to both people and place. Their rhythm was soft, consistent, and reassuring, offering comfort to every person who walked their paths, tended their fields, or rested near their hearths. And now, as our journey through these towns comes to a close, we can allow ourselves to rest alongside them. Let the gentle rhythms of early American life linger in your mind, the soft cadence of conversation, the deliberate pace of work, the quiet joy of play, the careful attention to health, and the harmonious unfolding of growth. Imagine yourself walking slowly through a town at sunset, feeling the warmth of hearths, hearing the gentle murmur of neighbors, and sensing the steady heartbeat of life carried forward across generations. The story of these towns is not merely history. It is a meditation on patience, community, and deliberate living. It reminds us that life's quiet moments, observed with care, can offer comfort, reassurance, and a lasting sense of belonging. The settlers built not just homes and streets, but a rhythm, a pulse of life that was both practical and soothing. And in their quiet, attentive way, they left a legacy of calm, measured living that continues to echo in the spaces we inhabit today. So, as the night deepens and your eyes grow heavy, let yourself drift gently along with the soft pulse of these towns. Feel the slow, deliberate rhythm of early American life wrapping around you like a warm, comforting blanket. Allow the gentle cadence of work, learning, care, and play to carry you softly toward rest. The streets, fields, and hearts of the past are still here in spirit, guiding you quietly into sleep, offering calm, reassurance, and a gentle sense of connection. And now, with the soft whispers of history surrounding you, let your thoughts settle. Every street, every home, every hearth we've visited today is a reminder that life, even in its simplest and slowest moments, can be rich, comforting, and full of gentle purpose. Drift along with this rhythm. Breathe slowly. Relax fully. Let the quiet heartbeat of early American towns guide you toward a night of calm, peaceful sleep. If you are still awake, take a slow, deep breath. Feel your body sink gently into the surface beneath you. Let your mind drift, carried softly by the calm rhythms of the past. The streets, homes, and hearts of early American towns rest now, and so can you. Allow the quiet stories, gentle work, and soft laughter of the settlers to lull you further. Let sleep come gently, wrapping you in its peaceful embrace. Good night.
They realized that something vital had been lost, the sense of place. As cities began to revitalize their downtowns and developers created lifestyle centers, the practice of street naming underwent yet another shift. This time, it was about creating an artificial sense of history and community to lure people back to the sidewalks. In these new developments, often called mixed-use communities, the naming process became a high-stakes exercise in psychology. Developers no longer wanted the anonymous street or avenue. Instead, they revived archaic suffixes like muse, lane, common, and walk. These terms were chosen specifically to evoke the feeling of a pre-automobile European village. Even in a brand new development in the middle of a Florida swamp or an Arizona desert, you might find a piazza way or a cottage row. This was themed naming, where the street name acted as a set piece in a theatrical production of urban life. This era also saw a push toward micro-naming. In large, dense cities, developers of luxury high-rises began to rebrand the small stretches of sidewalk in front of their buildings. A developer might petition the city to name a single block after a famous artist or an influential local figure to increase the prestige of the address. This led to a fragmented map where a single continuous road might change names 4 times in a mile, purely for the sake of real estate marketing. However, new urbanism also brought a positive change, the wayfinding renaissance. Planners realized that while GPS was great for cars, it was often terrible for people on foot. This led to the installation of high-design physical maps and street signs that featured more than just a name. They included historical tidbits, walking minutes to the next landmark, and neighborhood icons. The street sign was no longer just a legal requirement. It became a piece of street furniture designed to slow people down and encourage them to engage with their surroundings. Yet, this focus on curating the street experience highlighted a growing divide. While wealthy, revitalized areas enjoyed beautiful, themed streetscapes, the rest of the city often remained stuck with the utilitarian, aging signs of the 1970s. This aesthetic gap became a visual marker of gentrification. When the old industrial way was suddenly renamed Artisan Alley, the original residents knew that the neighborhood was no longer being designed for them. The street name, once a tool for simple navigation, had now become a leading indicator of economic change. As we move deeper into the 21st century, the battle for the curb is heating up. From the way we name our bike lanes to the way we designate smart zones for delivery drones, the map is being rewritten once again to accommodate technologies and social values that the original grid makers could never have imagined. As the 21st century progressed, the American street map became a primary battleground for the culture wars. If the 20th century was about adding new names to represent a diversifying nation, the 2020s became an era of interrogation. People began to look up at the signs that had been there for 100 years and ask, who was this person, and do they deserve to be on our map today? This period marked the era of reevaluation, where the practice of naming streets shifted from a quiet administrative task to a loud public reckoning with history. The most visible front of this battle was the removal of Confederate names across the American South. Streets named after Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson, and Jefferson Davis, many of which were named during the Jim Crow era specifically to assert white dominance, faced intense pressure for removal. For many residents, these names were not history, they were daily reminders of a legacy of oppression. When the city of Richmond, Virginia, or Austin, Texas, voted to rename Lee Highway or Confederate Avenue, it wasn't just a change of mail delivery, it was a public exorcism of the city's past. However, this process was rarely simple. Every name change sparked a counter-movement. Opponents of renaming argued that the map is a historical record, not a morality play. They claimed that erasing the names was an attempt to sanitize history. This led to fascinating legal and logistical standoffs. Some states even passed laws making it nearly impossible for local cities to change historic street names without state-level approval. The street sign, once a simple piece of metal, had become a totem of political identity. In the midst of this tug-of-war, a new trend emerged: thematic corrective naming. Instead of just removing a controversial name, cities began replacing them with figures who represented the antithesis of the previous namesake. In some cases, a street named after a slaveholder was renamed for an abolitionist who had lived on that very block. This created a geographic dialogue where the map was used to explicitly correct the narrative of the landscape. The logistics of these mass renamings also highlighted the friction between the physical and digital worlds. When a major artery like Jefferson Davis Highway becomes Richmond Highway, thousands of businesses have to change their stationery, websites, and legal filings. Emergency services, police, fire, and ambulance must update their databases instantly to ensure that a 911 call doesn't lead to a ghost address. This administrative friction became a common argument used by those resisting name changes, turning the mundane details of the post office into a weapon of political delay. Yet, despite the controversy, the trend toward more inclusive naming only accelerated. Cities began to adopt formal policies for naming, often requiring a waiting period after a person's death before they could be considered for a street name, or requiring a certain percentage of names to reflect local indigenous history. The map was no longer a static grid. It had become a living, breathing document that was constantly being edited by the values of the present day. We were no longer just navigating through space, we were navigating through a society trying to decide which parts of its soul it wanted to honor. As the 2020s progressed, a new layer of the American map began to peel back, revealing a history that predated the arrival of European explorers and the rigid grids of the 19th century. This movement, often called indigenous reclamation, challenged the very foundation of how we name our surroundings. For centuries, American street naming had been an act of erasure, renaming ancient trails and sacred sites with titles like Water Street or Broad Street. Now, from the Pacific Northwest to the Great Lakes, the original names of the land were fighting their way back onto the signs. In cities like Seattle, Minneapolis, and Anchorage, activists and tribal leaders began to push for bilingual signage. This wasn't just about adding a second name, it was about acknowledging that the street the modern American drives on is often a 1,000-year-old trade route. In Seattle, the city began installing signs that featured both the English name and the original Lushootseed name. Seeing a name like Hashush Hashubsh meaning place of the little red berries, next to a standard English street name, forced citizens to confront a simple truth. The history of their city didn't start with the first colonial surveyor. This movement introduced a unique linguistic challenge to the American street naming system. Indigenous languages often use sounds and characters, like the glottal stop, that don't exist in the English alphabet. This created a clash with the digital ghost we discussed in Chapter 9. Emergency dispatch systems, Google Maps, and government databases were often not equipped to handle non-English characters. The battle for the map became a battle for technical inclusivity. To put an indigenous name on a street sign, planners had to rewrite the code of the city's digital infrastructure. Beyond the technicalities, these renamings served as a geographic apology. In some regions, streets that had been named after individuals notorious for their violence against Native American tribes were renamed to honor indigenous leaders or concepts. In Denver, for example, the city renamed a street originally named for a territorial governor involved in the Sand Creek Massacre. The new name was chosen by the local community to reflect healing and resilience. However, this unnaming of the colonial past met with significant pushback. Some critics argued that these changes were performative or confusing for navigation. Yet the proponents argued that confusion was exactly the point. By disrupting the smooth, predictable flow of the English numbered grid, the new signs forced people to pause and recognize the complexity of the ground they were standing on. This era proved that the evolution of street naming isn't a straight line toward efficiency. It is a pendulum that swings between the need for order and the need for identity. As the United States continues to grapple with its origin story, the map is becoming more than just a tool to get from point A to point B. It is becoming a record of a nation's conscience. But while we were looking back at the land's ancient roots, a new frontier was opening up above our heads, one that would require an entirely different kind of naming logic. By the mid-2020s, the American city had run out of horizontal space. In hubs like New York, Chicago, and Miami, the grid was full. But as architects pushed higher into the clouds with super-tall skyscrapers, a new naming crisis emerged. We were no longer just naming the ground, we were naming the air. This era marked the birth of vertical naming, where the street address became less important than the sky identity. Historically, if you lived in a building, your address was tied to the street it sat on, for example, 432 Park Avenue. But as buildings became cities unto themselves, developers realized that a street address wasn't prestigious enough for a billion-dollar tower. They began to lobby city governments for vanity addresses. A building might not actually be on a certain famous street, but if it touched a tiny corner of it, the developer would fight to use that street's name. This led to a geographic stretch where the prestige of a name like Fifth Avenue was pulled blocks away from its actual location. The complexity deepened with the rise of mixed-use verticals. Imagine a 100-story building where the first 10 floors are a mall, the next 20 are offices, the next 30 are a hotel, and the top 40 are luxury condos. To the post office and emergency services, this is one plot of land. But to the owners, these are 4 distinct worlds. This led to the creation of interior streets. Large complexes started naming their internal hallways and sky bridges as if they were public roads. You might live on the Platinum Gallery Level 82 rather than Apartment 82B. This vertical expansion also gave rise to the air rights naming war. In dense urban centers, developers began building over existing structures, like train tracks or smaller buildings. When you build a park or a tower in the air above a rail yard, what do you name the ground that isn't actually ground? In New York's Hudson Yards, an entire neighborhood was created on a platform above a functioning train yard. The naming here was purely corporate and clinical, designed to create a new history where none existed.
However, the most futuristic challenge to street naming came from the sky above the buildings: drones. As companies like Amazon and UPS began testing drone delivery, the 2D street address started to fail. A drone doesn't care about Main Street, it needs a 3D coordinate: latitude, longitude, and altitude. This has led to the development of digital air alleys. While these aren't named with signs you can see, they are named in the code of the city's smart grid. Names like Flight Path Alpha 9 are becoming the invisible streets of the 21st century. This shift toward the vertical and the digital has created a stratified map. The wealthy live in the sky names, the middle class navigates the grid names, and the drones fly through the code names. The street name, once a democratic tool that everyone used in the same way, is becoming fragmented by height and technology. As we look up at the skyline, we are seeing the end of the traditional map and the beginning of a three-dimensional maze that requires a whole new vocabulary of power. As we move deeper into the 21st century, a new and controversial player has entered the arena of street naming: the global corporation. In an era of shrinking municipal budgets and the privatization of public space, the name of a street has become a valuable commodity to be bought, sold, and traded. This is the era of corporate toponymy, where the historical or civic identity of a road is increasingly being replaced by the logo of a sponsor. Historically, naming rights were reserved for sports stadiums or transit stations. But in the 2020s, the practice leaked onto the asphalt. In cash-strapped cities across America, local governments have begun exploring sponsorship agreements for major boulevards. Imagine driving down a road that was once called Industrial Way, now rebranded as Amazon Parkway or Google Lane. While this may sound like science fiction, it is becoming a fiscal reality. In exchange for paving the roads and maintaining the streetlights, corporations are demanding that their brand be etched into the GPS and the physical signs of the neighborhood. This shift represents a fundamental change in the social contract of the map. Traditionally, street names were a public good, a shared language owned by the citizens. When a name is sold to a corporation, it becomes a private signal. Critics argue that this creates a landscape of advertising where citizens can never truly escape the reach of marketing. If you live on Pepsi Plaza, your very address becomes a testimonial for a product. This commercial colonization of the map further erodes the sense of local history, replacing unique cultural markers with generic global brand identities. The conflict reaches its peak in Company Towns 2.0. In places like Menlo Park, California, or the sprawling Tesla gigafactories in Texas and Nevada, the corporations aren't just sponsoring streets, they are building entire cities from scratch. In these enclaves, the naming conventions are dictated by HR departments and marketing teams. Streets are named after company values, such as Innovation Way, Efficiency Drive, or Synergy Street. This is a return to the ego map of the monarchs, but instead of a king, the authority is the CEO. The digital implications are even more profound. Search engines and navigation apps often prioritize corporate landmarks over civic ones. If a company pays for enhanced presence on a digital map, their private street might appear more prominently than a public road. This creates a pay-to-play geography, where the visibility of a location is determined by its advertising budget. The descriptive era was about what was actually there. The corporate era is about who paid to be seen. However, this trend has also sparked an anti-branding counter-movement. Local communities are fighting back by proposing heritage zones where corporate naming is strictly forbidden. These activists argue that the names of our streets are the last frontier of the public mind. As the line between the public square and the private marketplace continues to blur, the battle over who gets to name the curb is becoming a battle for the soul of the city itself.
As the 2020s transitioned into the mid-decade, a new phenomenon emerged that fundamentally changed the DNA of the street name:
The smart city infrastructure. In places like Columbus, Ohio, and parts of the San Francisco Bay Area, streets are no longer just strips of asphalt. They are integrated sensor networks. This era, known as the Silicon Grid, has introduced a layer of technological naming that exists entirely for machines. While you might see a sign for Willow Street, the city's central operating system sees Node 88 Delta. This technological shift has created a bifurcated geography. For the first time in history, we have two parallel naming systems functioning at once. One is for humans, using traditional phonetic names, and the other is for autonomous vehicles, delivery bots, and traffic management AI. This binary navigation means that the street name is becoming a legacy interface, a skin that exists only because humans aren't yet ready to navigate via pure coordinates or hexadecimal strings. In these smart corridors, the physical street sign itself is being redesigned. In some pilot programs, digital street signs have replaced metal ones. These signs can change their names based on the time of day or the specific event occurring. A road might be Commerce Way during business hours, but automatically flip to Festival Lane on the weekend. This dynamic naming brings us back to the organic flexibility of the medieval era, but instead of the community deciding the name, it is an algorithm optimizing for traffic flow and revenue. The implications for wayfinding are massive. In a smart city, your car or your augmented reality AR glasses don't just tell you the name of the street, they highlight it in your field of vision. This has led to the death of the landmark. In the past, you'd find your way by looking for the red building or the big oak tree. Now, the digital overlay provides a synthetic landmark. The names themselves are becoming less about the place and more about the service the street provides. You might find yourself following a path named Optimized Transit Corridor 4 on your digital display, regardless of what the physical sign says. However, this reliance on code-based naming has introduced a new kind of vulnerability: geographic glitching. If a hacker or a software error changes a street's digital identity, the physical world can descend into chaos. We saw early versions of this when GPS ghosting led trucks into narrow alleys not meant for them. In the Silicon Grid, a name is a security key. If the key is corrupted, the street effectively disappears from the functioning world, even if the pavement is still there. As we move toward a world of self-driving cars and drone delivery hubs, the human street name is becoming a luxury, a piece of heritage branding, rather than a functional tool. The names we once used to tell stories and honor heroes are being archived, while the real business of the city is conducted in the silent, invisible language of the Silicon Grid. We are living in a world where the map is no longer a representation of the territory. The map is the territory.
By the late 2020s, a strange psychological shift occurred in the American psyche. As the Silicon Grid made physical street signs less relevant for navigation, the name of the street began to function almost exclusively as a marker of social and economic identity. In this era, street naming moved into the realm of data-driven prestige. It wasn't just about where you were going, it was about what your address said to an algorithm, a bank, or a social circle. Data scientists and sociologists began to observe the street name effect. Studies showed that properties on streets named Way or Lane were perceived as more exclusive than those on Street or Avenue, regardless of the actual house quality. This led to a wave of aspirational renaming. Homeowners associations, HOAs, across the United States began petitioning local governments to change their street suffixes to boost property values. A second street became Heritage Oak Mews. This was the final stage of the marketing of the dream that began in the 1950s, but now it was being optimized by real estate algorithms. The most significant change, however, was the rise of the digital zip code. In the age of big data, your street address became a key that unlocked or locked doors in the digital world.
Insurance companies, credit card firms, and even job recruitment AI started using the reputation of a street name to make automated decisions. If you lived on a street with a name associated with a high crime history, even if that history was decades old, the algorithm might flag your address as high risk. This created a digital redlining, where the name of a street became a cage. To combat this, a new movement of neutral naming emerged. Some progressive urban planners argued that to ensure social equity, we should move away from names entirely and back toward the cold, unbiased logic of numbers, but with a twist. They proposed coordinate addressing, where every location is a string of numbers representing its exact global position. The argument was that numbers don't carry the baggage of history, race, or class. A number doesn't have a reputation. But the human element resisted. People didn't want to live at grid point 45.332. They wanted the story of the name. This created a tension between the efficiency of the algorithm and the identity of the resident. In response, luxury developers began creating signature addresses, completely unique names that don't exist anywhere else in the world, specifically designed to be ungoogleable by anything other than the highest-end services. As we reached the end of the 2020s, the American street name had become a paradox. It was functionally useless for the machines that ran the city, yet it was more powerful than ever as a tool for social stratification. We were no longer naming paths, we were naming life tiers. The map had been transformed into a social credit system where the sign on the corner was the first thing a computer read to decide who you were and what you were worth.
As the 2020s drew to a close, a new and urgent force began to rewrite the American map, the environment. For centuries, street naming had been an act of human will. Monarchs, developers, and activists asserting their presence over the land. But as climate change accelerated, the land itself began to dictate the terms of the map. This era, known as the ecological realignment, saw the first instances of retreat naming, where street names became warnings rather than invitations. In coastal regions like South Florida, the Outer Banks, and parts of the Gulf Coast, sunny day flooding became a permanent fixture of life. Streets that were once named Beachfront Way or Ocean View Drive began to feel like cruel jokes. In response, local governments and insurance conglomerates began to implement a system of risk-based naming. In some experimental urban zones, streets were color-coded or renamed to reflect their vulnerability to rising tides. A street might be renamed Ephemeral Lane or Tidal Alley, signaling to residents and emergency services that this infrastructure was no longer considered permanent. This was the birth of the transition map. As entire communities were forced to relocate inland, they brought their street names with them. This created ghost neighborhoods, newly built inland suburbs that replicated the street names of the drowned towns they replaced. You could drive down Ocean Breeze Avenue in the middle of a high-altitude desert, a linguistic monument to a place that no longer existed. The street name had evolved into a vessel of memory, preserving the identity of a community even as its physical geography was erased by the sea. Meanwhile, in the American West, the wildfire grid emerged. To assist firefighting drones and autonomous emergency vehicles, roads in high-risk zones were renamed with evacuation suffixes. Instead of Pine Road, a street might be designated Pine EVAC 1. This was a return to the descriptive era, but with a lethal modern twist. The name was no longer about what was sold there or who lived there. It was a survival instruction. This period also saw the rise of green naming as a form of urban mitigation. To combat the urban heat island effect, cities began transforming asphalt roads into linear forests. These weren't just streets with trees, they were eco-corridors. The naming reflected this shift. Terms like Bioswale Boulevard, Canopy Court, and Oxygen Way became common in green grids. These names were designed to boost the ecological literacy of the citizens, making the map a tool for environmental awareness. However, the climate map also revealed deep social inequities. Wealthier neighborhoods were the first to receive green naming and the infrastructure upgrades that came with it. Meanwhile, lower-income areas often remained heat traps, stuck with their old industrial names and crumbling asphalt. The street name became a thermostat, a visual indicator of who was being protected from the changing climate and who was being left behind. As the Earth continued to shift, the American street map lost its sense of permanence. We were moving away from the stonework map of the 19th century and toward a fluid map. The names on our signs were no longer etched in stone, they were being written in the sand, subject to the whims of a planet that was no longer willing to be ignored.
As the world moved toward the late 2020s, the boundary between the physical and the digital didn't just blur, it fractured. The rise of the metaverse and pervasive augmented reality, AR, introduced a phenomenon that historians now call the overlap. This was the moment when street naming became a multi-layered experience, where a single physical location could have dozens of different names depending on which digital lens you were wearing. The street sign was no longer a piece of metal. It was a portal to a competing set of realities. In this era, tech giants like Meta, Apple, and decentralized platforms like Decentraland began to skin the real world. While the city government might still call a road 3rd Street, a private AR platform could sell the naming rights of that virtual space to a different entity. If you were using a Disney lens, the road might appear as Mickey Way, complete with digital decorations. If you were using a cyberpunk lens, it might be Neon Alley. This created a visual anarchy where the official map was just one of many options. This led to the great virtual land grab. Companies began to realize that the digital air above a physical street was an untapped gold mine. They started anchoring digital names to physical coordinates. This sparked a series of unprecedented legal battles. Does the city own the digital name of the street, or does the platform provider? In a landmark case in 2027, a court ruled that while the city owned the asphalt, the linguistic overlay was a matter of free speech and private property. This decision effectively ended the era of a single unified map for the public. However, the metaverse overlap wasn't just about entertainment. It became a tool for shadow governance. Activist groups used AR to rename streets in real time to highlight social issues without ever touching a physical sign. If a street was named after a controversial figure, an AR overlay could rebrand it for thousands of users simultaneously, effectively erasing the physical name from their reality. This was digital iconoclasm, the ability to destroy a name without destroying the sign. For the average citizen, this meant the end of shared navigation. You could no longer tell a friend to meet me on Broadway because their Broadway might be in a different digital layer than yours. Navigation apps had to evolve into identity managers, ensuring that everyone in a group was synced to the same map version. The street name, which for 1,000 years had been a tool for bringing people together in a shared space, had become a tool for algorithmic segregation. As we looked at our streets through our headsets and smart glasses, the physical world began to feel like a low-resolution base layer. The real name of the street was seen as boring or obsolete, while the digital name was where the status and excitement lived. We were living in a world of ghost geographies, where the most important names on the map were ones that didn't actually exist in the physical world. The map had finally detached itself from the Earth, floating into a cloud of competing corporate and personal fantasies.
As the 2020s drew to a close, the hyper-visibility of the Silicon Grid and the metaverse overlap triggered a massive societal counter-reaction. In a world where every street name was a data point
and every address was a digital footprint, a new urban movement emerged, the ghost street. This was the era of counter-mapping, where the most valuable street names were the ones that didn't appear on any digital map at all. This movement was led by privacy minimalists and high-net-worth individuals who sought to escape the relentless tracking of the smart city. They began creating off-grid enclaves, private developments where the streets were intentionally left unnamed or were given names that shifted periodically to confuse scrapers and AI bots. In these neighborhoods, navigation returned to the pre-descriptive era. To find a house, you had to know the local handshake, a specific sequence of landmarks, or a time-sensitive digital key. The street name became a secret. This privacy-based naming created a new kind of digital dark space. For the first time since the invention of the post office, the government lost control of the map in certain sectors of the city. These ghost streets became a nightmare for delivery services and law enforcement, but they became a sanctuary for those who could afford the right to disappear. The street name, once a tool for control and taxation, had been weaponized into a tool of evasion. The trend soon leaked into the mainstream as a form of neighborhood defense. Tired of digital tourism, where apps like Waze or Google Maps routed thousands of cars through quiet residential shortcuts, local communities began petitioning to have their street names delisted from public APIs. They wanted their streets to become invisible to the algorithm. In some cases, residents would intentionally put up confusing or fake physical street signs to discourage non-locals. This was geographic misdirection, a desperate attempt to reclaim the physical curb from the digital eye. This era also saw the rise of temporary naming. To facilitate pop-up cities or nomadic work hubs, temporary streets were created with names that only existed for a week or a month. These names were often generated by blockchain-based protocols, ensuring that once the event was over, the address vanished from history. It was the ultimate expression of the fluid map, a world where a name was as ephemeral as a social media post. However, the Ghost Street movement highlighted the final terminal stage of the identity divide. While the wealthy could afford to live in nameless sanctuaries, the rest of the population remained trapped in hyper-named zones, where every movement was logged and every sign was a sensor. The street map had become a filter. If you had a name, you were a product. If you didn't, you were a ghost. As we entered the final years of the decade, the very concept of a fixed address was beginning to dissolve into a sea of privacy tiers and digital shadows. As we look toward the horizon of the 2030s and beyond, the evolution of street naming has reached its final, most complex stage, the sentient map. We have traveled from the blunt, descriptive names of medieval mud tracks to the mathematical grids of the industrial age, through the marketing fantasies of the suburbs, and into the fractured realities of the digital era. Now, the street name is no longer a static label or even a piece of code. It has become a responsive, biological, and AI-driven entity. In the experimental biophilic cities of the future, streets are being renamed based on their real-time health. Sensors embedded in the soil and the air monitor carbon levels, biodiversity, and pedestrian happiness. If a street reaches a certain level of ecological health, its name might upgrade from Industrial Avenue to Regeneration Row. This is living toponymy, where the map reflects the current state of the environment. The name is no longer a monument to the past, but a report card for the present. Furthermore, the identity wars of the previous decades have given way to universal personalization. With the perfection of Neuralink interfaces and advanced AR, a street no longer has a single name at all. Through a cognitive overlay, the street name you see is tailored specifically to you. If you are a historian, the signs you see show the 18th century colonial names. If you are a botanist, you see the Latin names of the trees lining the curb. If you are a child, the city becomes a gamified wonderland with whimsical titles. The public map has finally shattered into billions of personal maps, each one a reflection of the individual's mind. However, this total personalization brings us back to the very first problem of the descriptive era. How do we find each other? In a world where no two people see the same street name, the number has returned as the ultimate neutral truth. Beneath all the digital skins and personal preferences, the cold, hard coordinates of the grid, the latitude, the longitude, and the altitude remain the only shared language of humanity. We have come full circle, returning to the mathematical precision of the Quaker's grid as our only anchor in a sea of shifting illusions. The history of street naming is the history of the human struggle for order. It is a story of how we try to tame the wild earth and our own chaotic societies. From the king's signature to the silicon grid, we use names to tell ourselves who is in charge and where we belong. But as the signs on the corners begin to flicker and change, we are reminded that the land itself is indifferent to our labels. Whether we call a road Broadway, 42nd Street, or Node 7, the road remains, a path for the next generation to walk, to name, and eventually rename. The map is never finished. It is a conversation between the past, the present, and the future. And as long as humans have the need to say, "I am here," we will continue to reach out and etch our names into the world, one block at a time.